My daughter-in-law kicked me out of the house after my son died, but at the will reading, they say grief is a heavy coat you can never quite take off, but betrayal? Betrayal is a knife that twists in the dark. I watched my daughter-in-law, Sarah, cry crocodile tears at my son's grave, her hand clutching his coffin while her eyes were already scanning the horizon for what he left behind. She thought I was just a senile old woman, a relic to be dusted off and discarded. She didn't know that the silence she forced upon me was about to speak the loudest truth of all. Welcome home, my darlings. It's Grandma Alice here. If you are new to our little circle of storytellers, come in, pull up a chair, and wrap your hands around a warm cup of tea. We talk about life, the pain of the heart, and the justice that time always delivers. Before I open the pages of my memory today, I have a small favor to ask. We are so close to reaching our goal. If you could press that subscribe button, you would help an old woman reach 1,000 subscribers before next week. It would mean the world to me. Now, let's begin. This house was never just a collection of bricks and mortar. To anyone driving by on Elm Street, it was just a two-story colonial with a wraparound porch and a weeping willow in the front yard. But to me, it was a living, breathing testimony of 50 years of love. My late husband, Harold, laid the hardwood floors in the hallway with his own hands. I could still hear the ghost of his boots clicking against the timber if the night was quiet enough. Every scratch on the banister was from my son David's toy cars. Every pencil mark on the kitchen doorframe was a height chart that stopped at 6'2". When Harold passed 10 years ago, the house felt too big, yet filled with him. I stayed because David asked me to. He was a good boy, the kind of son a mother prays for. He had his father's gentle eyes and a heart so big it sometimes made him blind to the sharp edges of the people he let inside. That sharp edge was Sarah. I remember the first time David brought her home. She was beautiful, sharp, and modern. She walked into my kitchen not with a smile, but with a critique. Her eyes swept over my floral wallpaper and my collection of ceramic roosters, and I saw a little crinkle in her nose. She didn't say it out loud, but her eyes screamed, outdated. "Mom," David had said, beaming, oblivious to the temperature drop in the room. "This is Sarah. She's the one." I welcomed her. I cooked her roast chicken. I gave her the quilt my mother made. I did it because I loved David, and I told myself that perhaps her coldness was just nervousness. But over the 5 years they were married, I learned that some people are just cold because they lack the fire of empathy. They moved in with me 3 years ago. It was supposed to be a temporary arrangement to help them save for their own place, but Sarah quickly realized the comfort of living rent-free. Slowly, the house began to change. My ceramic roosters disappeared, replaced by abstract metal sculptures that looked like tangled wire. My floral curtains were swapped for gray blinds. "It's more modern, Alice," Sarah would say, never calling me Mum or Grandma. Just Alice. "We need to increase the property value." I bit my tongue. I sat in my rocking chair on the porch, my last sanctuary, and told myself it didn't matter. As long as David was happy. As long as I could hear his laugh in the evenings. But then the laughter stopped. It started with a cough that wouldn't go away. Then came the weight loss, the fatigue, the doctor's visits that turned into hushed conversations behind closed doors. Cancer. It's a thief that steals time, dignity, and light. During those 6 agonizing months, the house became a waiting room for death. I wanted to be by David's side every moment, to wipe his brow, to make him the broth he loved. But Sarah became the gatekeeper. "He needs rest, Alice," she would say, blocking the bedroom door with her arms crossed. "You're hovering. You're making him anxious." She pushed me to the margins of my own son's life. I would sit in the hallway, listening to his labored breathing, clutching my rosary until my knuckles turned white. I could hear her in there, not comforting him, but talking about logistics. Insurance policies. Bank accounts. Future plans. "Don't worry, babe," I heard her say once, her voice low but piercing through the crack in the door. "When you're gone, I'll handle everything. I'll make sure the house is sorted. We won't have to deal with the clutter. The clutter? That's what I was to her. I was just another piece of old furniture she couldn't wait to put out on the curb. The night David died, a storm was battering the windows. The wind howled like a wounded animal. I was in the kitchen, boiling water, when the silence from the upstairs bedroom became heavier than the storm outside. I knew. A mother always knows. I dropped the kettle. I ran up the stairs, my old knees protesting, and burst into the room. Sarah was standing by the window, looking out at the rain. David was gone. His face was pale, finally at peace, stripped of the pain that had etched lines into his skin for months. I fell to my knees beside the bed, sobbing, pressing my cheek against his cooling hand. "My boy," I whispered. "My sweet, sweet boy." Sarah didn't touch me. She didn't offer a tissue. She walked over to the nightstand, picked up his watch, the expensive one she had made him buy, and slipped it into her pocket. "I'll call the funeral home," she said, her voice dry as dust. "Pull yourself together, Alice. We have people to call." The week of the funeral was a blur of black dresses and casseroles from neighbors who looked at me with pity. Sarah played the part of the devastated widow perfectly. She cried on cue, she leaned on the arms of her friends, she accepted condolences with a trembling lip. But whenever her eyes met mine across the crowded living room, they were hard, flinty, calculating. She was already measuring the walls. She was already counting the money. The day after we put David in the ground, the house was quiet. Too quiet. The neighbors had gone back to their lives. The casseroles were in the fridge. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at a cup of cold coffee, feeling a hollowness in my chest that threatened to swallow me whole. I was 72 years old, a widow, and now a mother without a child. I felt untethered, like a balloon whose string had been cut. Sarah walked into the kitchen. She wasn't wearing black anymore. She was wearing a bright red blouse and sharp trousers. She carried a clipboard. "Alice," she said, not sitting down. "We need to talk." I looked up, wiping a stray tear from my cheek. "Yes, Sarah? Is it about the thank you cards?" She let out a short, sharp breath, almost a laugh. "No. It's about the living situation." She placed the clipboard on the table and tapped it with a manicured fingernail. "Obviously, things are going to change now that David is gone," she began, her tone businesslike, as if she were firing an employee rather than speaking to her dead husband's mother. "This house is a lot. It's too big for one person. And frankly, the maintenance is eating into the savings." "I can help," I said softly. "My pension check." "Your pension check wouldn't cover the electric bill," she snapped, cutting me off. "Look, I've been thinking. It's time for me to move on. I'm young. I have a life to live. I'm going to sell the house." The air left my lungs. "The house," I whispered, my hand gripping the edge of the table. "But Sarah, this is my home. Harold built this. David grew up here. And David is dead," she said, the cruelty of her words hanging in the air like smoke. "The house passed to him when Harold died, and now, as his wife, it passes to me. That's how the law works, Alice." She didn't know. Oh, she was so sure of herself. She assumed that because David took care of the bills, David owned the deed. She assumed I was just a helpless old woman who had signed everything over years ago. "I've made arrangements," she continued, looking at her nails. "There is a lovely assisted living facility 2 towns over. Shady Pines. I've already paid the deposit for your first month. You can pack your things. The real estate agent is coming on Monday to take photos, and I don't want your clutter in the shots." "You're kicking me out?" My voice trembled. "Sarah, please. I have nowhere else. This is all I have." She finally looked me in the eye, and I saw the darkness there. It wasn't just greed, it was resentment. She had hated living with me. She had hated sharing David. And now she was erasing me. "You have until Sunday night," she said coldly. Pack your clothes and whatever trinkets you can fit in 2 boxes. Anything left behind goes to the dump." She turned on her heel and walked out, the clicking of her heels sounding like gunshots on the hardwood floor, the same floor my Harold had laid with such love. I sat there for a long time, the kitchen growing dark as the sun set. I looked at the pencil marks on the doorframe. David at age 5, age 10, age 18. Sarah was going to paint over them. She was going to sell our memories to strangers. She was going to throw me into a home where I would rot away, forgotten. Panic rose in my throat, hot and sour. I wanted to scream. I wanted to chase after her and shake her. But then, a strange calm washed over me. I looked at the old grandfather clock in the hallway. It was ticking steadily, just as it had for 40 years. Tick, tock, tick, tock. Patience. Sarah thought she held all the cards. She thought the power lay in who shouted the loudest, who dressed the sharpest, who had the most time left on this earth. But she had forgotten one thing. The will reading was scheduled for Tuesday. I stood up, my joints aching, and walked to the window. I saw Sarah in the garden, talking on her phone, laughing. She was probably already spending the money she thought this house would bring. I reached into the pocket of my cardigan and pulled out a small, brass key. It was a key Sarah had never seen. It opened a safe deposit box at the bank downtown, a box that hadn't been opened since Harold died. I dried my tears. I didn't pack a single box. That night, the house felt different. It didn't feel like a tomb anymore. It felt like a courtroom waiting for the judge to arrive. As I lay in bed, listening to Sarah pacing downstairs, I realized that grief makes you vulnerable, but it also makes you dangerous. Because when you have lost everything that matters, you have nothing left to lose. And Sarah? She was about to learn that you should never underestimate a mother protecting her nest. The storm was over, but the thunder was just beginning. Silence is a strange thing. Sometimes it is peaceful, like snow falling on a cedar tree. But sometimes it is heavy, loaded with things unsaid, like the air before a tornado touches down. For 3 days, I lived in the eye of that tornado. Sarah moved through the house like a conqueror, erasing the fingerprints of my life, confident that I was defeated. She didn't see me watching. She didn't see that while she was packing up my past, I was quietly preparing for her future. Hello again, my dears. It warms my heart to see you back. I've been reading your comments, and your support is the cane I lean on when the memories get heavy. If you haven't already, please do click that subscribe button. We are building a family here, one story at a time, and I don't want you to miss a single moment of what happened next. Now, take a deep breath with me. The storm is about to break. Saturday morning arrived with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. I woke up to the sound of furniture dragging across the floorboards above my head. Sarah wasn't wasting a single second. She had given me until Sunday night to pack, but she had already begun the process of erasing us from the home on Saturday morning. I dressed slowly, putting on my favorite cardigan, the one with the pearl buttons that Harold had bought me for our 40th anniversary. I needed armor. When I walked downstairs, the smell hit me first. It wasn't the smell of bacon or coffee, which used to fill this house on weekends. It was the chemical sting of fresh paint. I froze in the hallway. There was a man in white coveralls standing on a ladder, a roller in his hand. He was painting the hallway walls. He was covering the soft cream color we had lived with for 20 years with a stark, sterile shade of grayish, that soulless mix of gray and beige that Sarah loved so much. But it wasn't the color that stopped my heart. It was where he was painting. Stop! The word tore out of my throat before I could catch it. The painter looked down, startled, dripping gray paint onto the drop cloth. Sarah stepped out of the kitchen, holding a mug of green tea, looking annoyed at the interruption. "What is the matter with you, Alice?" she sighed. "You're startling the contractors." I pointed a shaking finger at the kitchen door frame. "That frame, you can't paint over that frame." Sarah rolled her eyes. "Oh God, not this again." "David's height chart is on that wood," I said, my voice cracking. Every year since he was 3 years old. Harold marked it with a carpenter's pencil. You can't just cover it up. It's him. It's proof he grew here. Sarah took a sip of her tea, her eyes cold and unmoving. It's graffiti, Alice. It's writing on the woodwork. It looks messy. We have an open house in 2 weeks. Buyers don't want to see your sentimental scratches. They want a clean slate. She turned to the painter. Keep going. 2 coats. I don't want any of those marks showing through. I stood there, rooted to the spot, as the painter hesitated, looked at me with a flash of apology in his eyes, and then slapped the wet roller against the wood. Swish. Swish. Just like that, my son's childhood was gone. Covered in gray sludge. I didn't scream. I didn't attack her. I simply turned around and walked into the living room, my heart hardening into a stone in my chest. If she could erase my son so easily, she deserved no mercy for what was coming. By Sunday afternoon, the tension in the house was thick enough to choke on. Sarah was frantic. She had expected to see boxes lined up by the door. She had expected me to be weeping, begging for a few more days, or perhaps asking for help moving my things to the Shady Pines nursing home. Instead, she found me sitting in the sunroom, reading my Bible, with not a single suitcase in sight. She marched in, her heels clacking on the tile like the hooves of a warhorse. Alice, she barked. Why aren't you packed? The van is coming tomorrow morning to take your things to the facility. I told you, I need this room cleared out for the staging furniture. I turned a page slowly, savoring the rustle of the paper. I didn't look up. I'm not packing, Sarah. Excuse me? Her voice went up an octave. You're not packing? Are you going senile? Do I need to call the orderlies to come get you physically? You have to leave. This is my house. I finally looked up. I looked at her flushed face, her angry eyes, the way her hands curled into fists at her sides. She looked like a spoiled child who had been told no for the first time in her life. I am not packing, I repeated calmly, because I am waiting for the will reading on Tuesday. It seems improper to move out before David's final wishes are officially read. Don't you think? Sarah laughed. It was a cruel, sharp sound. David's final wishes? Alice, David didn't have a penny to his name that wasn't shared with me. We were married. Everything goes to the spouse. That's the law. The will reading is just a formality the bank insists on. Don't delude yourself into thinking he left you a secret fortune. He barely left enough to cover the mortgage. Then you have nothing to worry about, I said, turning back to my book. If it's just a formality, we can wait until Tuesday. I'll leave after the lawyer reads the paper. Not a moment before. She stared at me, her chest heaving. She wanted to throw me out right then and there. I could see her calculating the risk of dragging an old woman onto the porch in broad daylight where the neighbors might see. Fine, she hissed. Stay until Tuesday. But Tuesday afternoon, if your bags aren't packed, I'm calling the sheriff to evict you for trespassing. Do you understand me? You will be homeless, Alice. I understand you perfectly, my dear, I whispered to the empty room as she stormed out. Monday was a blur of activity, but not the kind Sarah expected. While she was at work, probably bragging to her colleagues about the renovations she was doing, I put on my best coat and called a taxi. I went to the First National Bank on Main Street. The teller, Mrs. Higgins, had known Harold for 30 years. When she saw me, her face softened. "Oh, Mrs. Alice," she said, reaching through the glass partition to squeeze my hand. "I was so sorry to hear about David. How are you holding up?" "I am managing, Martha," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I need to access Harold's safety deposit box. The one from the trust." Martha nodded solemnly. She led me into the vault, the heavy steel door swinging open with a groan. The air inside was cool and smelled of old paper and copper. When she unlocked box 402 and left me alone, my hands trembled as I lifted the metal lid. There was the thick, cream-colored envelope sealed with red wax. The document Harold and I had drawn up 5 years ago, right after David married Sarah. Harold had never trusted her. "She has hungry eyes, Alice," he had told me one night. "She looks at David and sees a wallet, not a man. We have to protect the legacy." I hadn't wanted to believe him then. I wanted to believe in love. But Harold was a wise man. I took the envelope, tucked it into my purse, and felt a surge of strength flow through my veins. This wasn't just paper. It was a shield. I returned home just before Sarah arrived. I sat in the kitchen, drinking tea, watching her come in with armfuls of throw pillows and fake plants for the staging. She ignored me completely, treating me like a ghost that hadn't gotten the message to cross over yet. That night, the last night in the house as we knew it, I hardly slept. I listened to the wind rattling the window pane. I spoke to David in the dark. "I'm sorry, son," I whispered. "I know you loved her. But I cannot let her destroy what your father built. I hope you can forgive me for what I'm about to do." Tuesday morning dawned gray and rainy. The sky wept, fitting for the day. Sarah was up early, dressed in a sharp black suit that looked expensive. She had blown out her hair and applied impeccable makeup. She looked like she was going to a board meeting to close a deal, not to hear her dead husband's last words. I wore my Sunday best, a navy blue dress with a high collar and a small hat with a veil. I wanted to look like myself. I wanted to look like the mistress of this house. "The lawyer's office is across town," Sarah said, grabbing her car keys. "I suppose you need a ride? Unless you want to take the bus with your luggage?" "I'll ride with you," I said. The car ride was suffocating. Sarah blasted the radio, some pop song about money and parties, drowning out the sound of the rain. She tapped her fingers on the steering wheel, humming along. She was practically vibrating with excitement. In her mind, the house was already sold, the money was already in her account, and I was already a memory. We pulled up to the law offices of Henderson, Finch, and Associates. It was an old brick building with ivy crawling up the sides. Mr. Henderson had been Harold's lawyer for 40 years. He was a man of few words and absolute integrity. We walked into the waiting room. It was lined with dark wood and filled with leather chairs that smelled of tobacco and tradition. Sarah checked her watch immediately. "Our appointment is at 10, she announced to the receptionist. "It's 9:58. We'd like to get this over with quickly. I have a realtor meeting at noon." "Mr. Henderson will be with you shortly," the receptionist said politely, though her eyes lingered on me with a warm sadness. We sat. Sarah pulled out her phone and started scrolling, ignoring me. I sat with my purse in my lap, clutching the strap with both hands. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. This was it. The moment of truth. The heavy oak door to the inner office opened. Mr. Henderson stood there. He was a tall man, stooped with age, with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses. He wore a charcoal suit that looked as timeless as the building itself. He didn't look at Sarah. He looked straight at me. "Alice," he said, his voice deep and gravelly. "Please, come in." Sarah stood up first, brushing lint off her skirt. "Finally. Let's wrap this up." She marched past him into the office, claiming the large leather chair directly across from the desk. She crossed her legs and placed her designer handbag on the desk, right next to the blotter. I followed slowly, taking the smaller chair to the side. Mr. Henderson closed the door, shutting out the world. The silence in the room was absolute. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Tick, tock, tick, tock. Mr. Henderson walked behind his massive desk and sat down. He didn't open a folder immediately. He took off his glasses and cleaned them with a handkerchief, taking his time. Sarah sighed loudly. "Mr. Henderson, really? We all know how this goes. David leaves everything to me. Can we just get to the signatures? I have a busy day." Mr. Henderson put his glasses back on. He looked at Sarah over the rims, his eyes sharp as flint. "Mrs. Sarah," he began, his tone deceptively mild. "You seem to be under the impression that this is a standard probate reading." Isn't it? She snapped. Usually yes, he said. He picked up a file, a thin, blue file. However, David's will, or rather, the document you believe to be the controlling authority, is subject to the terms of the original family trust. Sarah frowned. Trust? What trust? David never mentioned a trust. He wouldn't have. I spoke up for the first time. My voice was quiet, but it didn't shake. Because David didn't own the house, Sarah. He was merely the beneficiary of the trust while he was alive. Sarah whipped her head around to look at me, her eyes wide with sudden confusion. What are you talking about, old woman? Mr. Henderson cleared his throat. What Alice is saying is correct. The title to the property on Elm Street, along with the primary savings accounts, were placed in an irrevocable living trust by Harold and Alice 10 years ago. Upon Harold's death, the assets did not pass to David. They remained in the trust. He paused, letting the words hang in the air. And, Mr. Henderson continued, leaning forward, the trust stipulates that upon the death of a beneficiary, your husband, David, all usage rights revert immediately to the surviving grantor. Sarah's face went pale. Surviving grantor? Who is the grantor? Mr. Henderson smiled, a small, grim smile that didn't reach his eyes. He extended a hand toward me. The grantor, he said, is sitting right there. The room seemed to tilt. Sarah looked from the lawyer to me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish on dry land. The arrogance was cracking, revealing the panic underneath. But, she stammered. But that's not fair. We were married. That's marital property. Not if it was never his to begin with, I said. I reached into my purse and pulled out the envelope I had retrieved from the bank. I placed it gently on the desk. This is the deed, Sarah. And this is the eviction notice you printed for me. I think you might need to read it again. But this time, imagine your name at the top. Sarah stood up, her hands slamming onto the desk. You can't do this. I have rights. I'm the widow. And I said, meeting her gaze with a fire that had been smoldering for months, am the mother. And you, Sarah, you are just a guest who overstayed her welcome. Mr. Henderson opened the file. Shall we proceed with the details of your departure, Sarah? Or would you like to hear the rest of the will? Because I'm afraid it gets worse. Sarah slumped back into her chair, the color draining from her face until she looked like a ghost herself. The silence that filled the room wasn't heavy anymore. For me, it was light. It was the feeling of chains breaking. But as Mr. Henderson turned the page, I saw a flicker of something in Sarah's eyes. Not just fear, but a sudden, desperate rage. The cornered animal was about to bite, and I realized that winning the house was only the first battle. The war was far from over. Victory does not always taste sweet. Sometimes, it tastes like cold ash. I sat in that leather chair, my hands folded over my purse, watching the woman who had tormented me crumble into a pile of panic and cheap perfume. I didn't feel joy. I felt a deep, profound sadness that it had come to this, that my son had married a woman whose heart was a hollow space where love should have been. But as the lawyer turned the page, I knew the lesson wasn't finished. Sarah had sown the wind. Now, she had to reap the whirlwind. It gets worse, Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible over the drumming of the rain against the window pane. She looked small now, shrinking into the high-backed chair. Mr. Henderson adjusted his glasses and looked at the ledger in front of him. David was a good man, but he was not a wealthy one on his own, he explained calmly. The lifestyle you two enjoyed, the vacations, the cars, the renovations, was subsidized by the dividends from the family trust. A trust that, as I mentioned, lists Alice as the sole trustee and beneficiary upon Harold's death. He paused, letting the weight of the words settle. Furthermore, Mr. Henderson continued, the joint savings account you have been accessing since David's passing, the one you used to pay for the staging furniture and the deposit on your new apartment, that account was linked to the trust as a custodial allowance. Legally, those funds belonged to Alice. Sarah's mouth fell open. But I spent nearly $12,000. I thought it was ours. It was never yours, I said softly. It was Harold's blood, sweat, and tears. And you spent it on gray paint to cover up his memory. Mr. Henderson leaned back. Technically, Mrs. Sarah, this constitutes misappropriation of funds. Alice could press charges. We could look at jail time. The air left the room. Sarah turned to me, and for the first time, I saw genuine terror in her eyes. The mask of the grieving widow, the mask of the savvy businesswoman, it all melted away. She reached across the desk, her hand trembling as she tried to touch my arm. I pulled back. Alice, she stammered, tears spilling over her mascara-laden lashes. Alice, please. I didn't know. I was grief-stricken. I wasn't thinking straight. You know I love you, right? We're family. We can work this out. I can stay in the guest room. We can live together, just like before. I looked at her, really looked at her. I saw the fury, but I also saw the manipulation. She didn't want me. She wanted the roof over her head. She wanted the safety net she had just tried to cut out from under me. Sarah, I said, my voice steady and low. Do you remember last Sunday? Do you remember when I begged you? When I told you I had nowhere to go? You looked me in the eye and told me to pack my boxes. I was stressed, she sobbed. No, I said, shaking my head slowly. You were cruel. And cruelty is a choice. You showed me exactly who you are when you thought you held the power. Now that the power is mine, I will show you who I am. I turned to Mr. Henderson. I won't press charges for the money she spent. Let that be the price of her exit. I stood up, smoothing the wrinkles in my dress. I looked down at her. You have until tonight, Sarah. Not Sunday. Tonight. I want you out of my house before the sun goes down. Take your clothes. Take your car. But leave everything else. Leave the furniture. Leave the photos. And leave my key on the kitchen counter. Tonight, she shrieked. But where will I go? I hear Shady Pines has immediate openings, I said. Perhaps you can use the deposit you paid for me. I didn't wait for her response. I walked out of that office into the rain, and for the first time since David died, I breathed air that felt clean. The taxi ride home was quiet. When I arrived, Sarah's car was already there, trunk open. She was running back and forth, throwing designer suitcases into the back, cursing loudly. She didn't look at me as I walked up the porch steps. She was frantic, like a rat fleeing a sinking ship. I went inside and locked the door behind me. The house was silent. The staging furniture, the ugly abstract art, the cold metal lamps, looked alien in my warm living room. I walked straight to the kitchen. The painter had finished his job. The doorframe, the one with 30 years of David's growth marks, was covered in a thick, wet layer of grayish paint. My heart seized. I dropped my purse and ran to the utility drawer. I dug frantically until my fingers closed around a metal scraper. I fell to my knees before the doorframe. No, 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 I whispered, tears finally blinding me. I scraped at the wet paint. It was messy. It smeared. But slowly, carefully, I peeled back the gray sludge. Underneath, faint but visible, was the pencil line. David, age 10. I sobbed. I sat on the floor, surrounded by paint chips, tracing the line with my trembling finger. She hadn't erased him. She couldn't. The roots of this family went too deep for her to dig up. I heard a car engine rev outside, followed by the screech of tires peeling out of the driveway. Sarah was gone. I sat there for a long time as the twilight settled over the house. It was just me now. The house was too big, the silence was loud, but it was my silence. It was the silence of peace, not oppression. I stood up, my knees creaking, and wiped my face. I had work to do. Over the next few weeks, I reclaimed my sanctuary. I donated the modern furniture Sarah had bought. I brought my ceramic roosters back down from the attic. I hung my floral curtains back up, letting the sunlight filter through in warm, yellow patches. One afternoon, I sat on the porch in my rocker, sipping tea. The neighbor, Mrs. Gable, walked by. She stopped at the gate. "Alice," she called out. "I saw the for sale sign is gone. Are you staying?" I smiled, rocking back and forth. "I am Martha. I'm not going anywhere." "And Sarah?" she asked, lowering her voice. "I haven't seen her." "Sarah has moved on to a life better suited for her," I said simply. I never heard from Sarah again. I heard rumors, of course. Small towns love to talk. I heard she moved to the city, looking for another husband, another wallet, another house to conquer. I pity the man she finds. As for me, I live in the house Harold built. Every morning, I touch the doorframe where David grew. Every evening, I talk to their photos on the mantel. I am alone, but I am not lonely. Life has a way of balancing the scales. Sarah thought poverty was a sin and age was a disease. She thought she could discard people like old receipts. But she learned the hardest lesson of all. You can own a house, but you cannot buy a home. And you can inherit money, but you cannot inherit character. The will didn't just give me back my property, it gave me back my dignity. And as I sit here, watching the weeping willow sway in the breeze, I know that David is finally at peace, knowing his mother is safe, right where she belongs. Thank you for sitting with me today, my darlings. It wasn't an easy story to tell, but the truth rarely is. We all face storms in life: betrayal, loss, the fear of being forgotten. But remember this, even when the world tries to paint over your history, your truth is still there, right beneath the surface, waiting for you to uncover it. If this story touched your heart, or if you believe that justice always finds a way, please do me a kindness and click that subscribe button. It helps our family grow, and I have so many more stories to share with you. Stories of love, lessons, and the secrets we keep. Until next time, keep your chin up, keep your heart open, and never let anyone tell you that you don't belong in your own life. Love, Grandma Alice.